Hello there, everybody. And Brian here. Brian, my good friend, the doctor who I watch sometimes when players get injuries, is going to talk about what is ruining the NBA playoffs. Of course, injuries because Giannis is out. De'Aaron Fox just got ruled out with the tip of his finger like broken or something, or cracked, or something like that. And who else? Yeah, I guess Kawhi is out too. PG.
Earlier today, we
But I don't feel as bad for the Clippers because the Suns, my favorite team, is facing the Clippers. So I could
found out
feel
De'Aaron Fox has a broken finger.
Yeah.
And then just got news that Kawhi Leonard is expected to be out for Game 5,
Ooh.
making what's already been an injury-riddled playoffs even more influenced by the absence of
Yeah,
these
Ja.
stars. Welcome back, everybody. I'm
Oh,
Dr.
and
Brian
Embiid are
Siegel. My
out.
goal in this channel is to
Yes,
help teach
yeah.
you about the medical side of the sports world.
They both
In a
got
season
out.
full of stories about load management and an attempt to prevent players from getting hurt, here we are at the most important time of the year dealing with star after star suffering another injury that's going to have an undoubtable effect on the outcomes of these playoffs. Some of them have been completely random and bad luck. Here with De'Aaron Fox as he goes up to try and finish this play, tossing up a layup after the play's already been blown dead, we find out he ended up with a fractured finger on his left side. Here as he goes up, what likely happened is just swiping down from the Warriors player, probably hit directly on his pointer finger. Now we find out that Fox is dealing with a fracture, and specifically his distal phalanx. After the play, we could see him grabbing at that finger a little bit, didn't really think much of it, and he's going to try to play in the next game, but is probably going to be hampered somewhat, dealing with either pain or impaired function in that finger. On our biodigital anatomy tool here, these are the bones of the hand. And when we go through our index finger, our middle finger, our ring finger, and our pinky finger, we have three phalanges. We have a proximal phalanx, which is closest to the rest of the body. We have a middle phalanx, and then a distal phalanx, the one that's furthest out towards the fingernail. The one that Fox fractured is this distal phalanx. It's basically the bone of your finger that's right below your fingertip. Depending on where the fracture is, if it's a crush fracture right here at the tip, we call it a tough.
That's crazy because my fingers are round, and just imagining that is crazy. Because, like, if you look at it, like how around I guess everybody's fingers are round, right? Because you don't got pointy fingers. But, like, that's a lot of flesh. That's all I gotta say.
We have to worry about damage to the nail bed and providing some complications later on. It can also be at the shaft or here at the base. With Fox, it sounds like he's going to try and give it a go, but you can imagine if you're dealing with pain in your index finger as you're rolling off from your shot, that's definitely going to have some effect on your offensive production. The Kawhi Leonard injury has no more clarity than what we should expect based on his history of these sort of unknown, unusual types of injury patterns.
Skip says
the only
his
thing
knees
that's
are
been going
bad,
around the internet is a potential injury time was here right at the end of game 1. When he was coming down, he stepped a little bit awkwardly on that right knee here as he was falling outwards to his side. And of course now is dealing with this nondescript right knee sprain that's going to have him out of game 5. Frankly, it's hard to say if this was for sure the moment where this injury could have occurred because Kawhi ended up playing in all of game 2, and who knows how bad things were at this point versus what might have been exacerbated in game 2. But I don't see any unusual shift here. I don't see any inward movement or shift of his tibia to make me think there's been a new injury to his ACL. But of course, it's really hard with Kawhi because this is similar to what happened when he did tear the ACL. It started off as this nondescript knee sprain, which implies an injury to a ligament, and then we found out ultimately it was his ACL, and he missed the whole in subsequent season. We got a recent report from Chris Haynes, though, that's really concerning and makes me worried about Kawhi's status for honestly the rest of the first round, if not even the second round. Haynes said that Kawhi was dealing with a significant amount of swelling inside the knee that started after game 2, and there was no timetable for his return. If the report is true about swelling inside Kawhi's knee, that raises concern for either an intra-articular ligament injury like the ACL or the PCL, or what's probably more common, an injury to something like the meniscus, or just honestly irritation of the cartilage within Kawhi's knee. Injuries to things like the LCL, like we'll talk about with Joel Embiid, or the MCL, which is an injury like Kevin Durant suffered earlier in the year, those injuries don't typically cause swelling inside the knee joint. They might cause some pain and swelling outside of the joint, but those are extra-articular, meaning outside of the joint structures. So if the reporting is true here about a real effusion or swelling inside the knee, then that makes something like an MCL sprain or an LCL injury much less likely. To me, the most probable thing is that this is either irritation of the meniscus in Kawhi's knee or the cartilage in Kawhi's knee, because both of those are injuries that can initially be a little bit nondescript and hard to pick up. But the more you load, the more you play on them, the more you irritate them, and the more you develop that fluid and swelling inside the knee joint. These are also injuries that are much harder.
You know what I wonder? Like, when your knee swells, right? Like, like, isn't it like puffy, right? So that means something is making it puffy. So would it be like water or like what would it be like? Wouldn't it be like I don't know like would you drain your knee? Would they stick something into you? Like I don't even want to think about it. Never
To
mind, let's keep going.
definitively treat in a short time span like what we have here in the playoffs. It really is a balance of how much you're loading the joint versus how much rest you're putting the joint through before you're able to functionally recover and play well. And in
He
a
was
player
playing
like
43
Kawhi,
minutes.
we've seen this history before of a real sort of challenge between managing the load through the structure and the subsequent pain and symptoms through those same structures. It might not matter if the
Per
Clippers lose
game, I
game
think.
5, but even if they win, I'd honestly be surprised if we saw Kawhi the rest of the first round. And even if this didn't cause him to miss some time in subsequent rounds, if they do advance. My pessimism for Kawhi
Maybe not.
explains why I'm more optimistic, though, on a different player, Joel Embiid, who we found out recently some more details. It seems to be an injury to his LCL, a sprain of the lateral collateral ligament that happened here on this play. As Joel was coming up and going down, my honest first thought was just something like a little bit of a bone contusion or a bone bruise, because it looked like he hyper
I didn't think he heard it right here. I thought he heard it when he like went back.
extended his right knee just a little bit as he landed here on the ground. But if we look at the position of his foot down
Right
here,
here?
he's a little bit on the outside of his foot.
Is that
and so
his knee
I
right
suspect
here?
from a different angle, his knee is
It
probably
is right here.
being bent a little bit outward.
It is right
As the
here,
knee
huh?
bends outward, that's going to stretch the structures on the outside of the knee, particularly the LCL. And if we play through the rest of this, we could even see Joel grabbing down there on the outside of his
I thought he landed and then like his foot was under.
knee
That's why.
as he came up from this play. In this other angle, we can again see that little bit of a jar in that right knee as he lands. And so
Yeah.
it's probably just the most subtle amount of strain that caused some injury to that LCL. Now, it's probable that there's some bone bruising still underneath all this, but the LCL is a more identifiable injury that they can describe and sort of report as what he's recovering from. But going back to our anatomy model here, I'm more optimistic about that because it's a true, like, discrete injury. The swelling is going to be outside the joint. It's something with a much more reliable timetable that you can also provide some external support to brace and get somebody back through. This isn't something that's going to be subjectively loaded repeatedly, causing more irritation and fluid buildup like something that's inside the joint. So while Embiid might have a longer absence and be out for early on in the second round, it's something that once it recovers in my mind should be done and behind him, unlike something potentially inside the joint with Kawhi, that's going to be more of a load management in terms of how it responds throughout the rest of the playoffs, on and off sort of injury. But this is another one of those total fluke types of injuries. If he doesn't land right here this exact way, if Johnson isn't in this exact position, Embiid doesn't slightly hyperextend, he doesn't load his LCL, and he's not injured. Moving on to other stars, of course, we've talked about two big falls. Giannis, of course, has come back.
Jaws. Bro, I watched the video on Jaws fall. That shit was bad. Like watching it in slow motion is crazy how he didn't break a finger. Like that was insane.
He's been able to play and look pretty effective, but some fluke fall, landing on just the right spot, that causes enough of a bruise, kept Giannis out enough that hopefully the Bucks can recover and still win the series. But again, has really opened things
Currently
up
down
in the East from
2.
when the Heat were able to come back and do well early on. The other major fall, of course, here
Yo,
was
this
John
one-
Morant.
I don't
He
wanna-
goes up, he comes down and lands
I don't want to watch
in
this
just
one.
the right awkward position on his
That
right wrist,
shit
and he
was
forces
bad.
it into that hyper-flexed position. And another player that, while he's been able to return, is undoubtedly going to be hampered by this throughout the remainder of the playoffs.
Scored
There's just
42
no
yesterday.
way
I don't know how much
that
he
you
scored
can
today.
sustain this degree of force through your wrist and not at least have it affect you to some degree when you're playing at this level at the end of the season. If Davis is not exactly in this position, because you can see here as Ja's trying to fall, he's trying to bring that right arm back. And
He would have got it clear if Davis wasn't here because he would have landed perfectly right. I don't know how much pain he would have been because you're not. I guess you're not supposed to land like that or whatever. That's what he said. I think, not quoting him. Maybe I'm wrong, but like right here because his arm,
and be able to plant more firmly with his hand outstretched like we see with his left hand.
Ja
But
had
because his
19
right
today.
arm runs into Anthony Davis's thigh, that pushes it forward, that gets his
LeBron
fingers locked into this
22,
goofy
Davis
position
12,
and forces
and
him
11.
into that hyperflexion.
You
So
know
again,
Shannon not gonna
yes,
be happy.
Ja plays this way. It's a riskier way to play, but the perfect position for Davis to be in as he comes down, forces his wrist into that angle, and leads to this injury. And finally, how many times have we seen players dive for loose balls throughout the season and
I
not
don't know
suffer
how
any
he broke
injury
his
at all?
hand.
But then sure enough, on
I don't know how he broke his hand right. I don't know.
this play, Tyler
Like, is it the bottom of his hand?
Hero ends up breaking 2 bones in his hand.
Oh,
I honestly don't know if there's another sport that's as influenced and altered in the postseason by injuries to its stars. We saw this happen when Kawhi stepped on Zaza's foot recently. Of course, we saw it when Kawhi tore his ACL in the playoffs. There's so much hanging on individual players in the NBA playoffs that an injury truly can change the entire landscape of the season in terms of who comes out the champion. And we joke about the best ability is availability, and honestly, to a big degree, that's true. We're seeing it played out right now in the playoffs. It forces you to almost consider more who was the healthiest team, not just who was the best team. Whenever we see things like this happening throughout the playoffs, and it's only the first round, which is crazy to think that this could potentially continue to happen.
Knocking on wood for the Suns.
See more of these injuries to big stars in the rest of the playoffs. I'm not smart enough to make some big point through all this with things like load management. Enough of these injuries were fluky things like Hero diving for the ball or Fox getting his finger broken that you clearly cannot blame the season, schedule, the workload, etc. As opposed to other things on one hand like Kawhi's, maybe you could, but again, we still really don't know. But overall, I just hope this was educational, especially to talk about Kawhi, talk a little bit about Embiid and De'Aaron Fox, and really just this landscape with the playoffs. It's a huge bummer because it really is influencing things, and I think takes away from who truly is the best team out there and makes it more about who is the healthiest, or in some cases, just honestly, the luckiest team on the court. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.
Good video. I'll fuck with you.
We increase.
Really enjoyed the overall of the autonomy, like biome mechanics of this rash of injuries. Like you mentioned, the NBA is such a star-driven league, so the injuries to big name players always has such a profound effect on such teams. That's true. This is why roster depth is so important to not lose sight of the front office. Clippers have hella depth, and it's not about to matter. I disagree. If your star goes down, you're going to lose anyway. Depth is irrelevant as stars. You're not having MVP type players just sitting on the bench. I was just about to say that. It's kind of true, but it can't really win a playoff series without your best players, no matter how deep the team is. That's true. You got to have your best players. Having depth helps a lot just in case something happens. Then you could fill in a spot or two until the main dude comes back. But yeah, like, subscribe. See you guys later. Hope you have a good day.